Probably the only person here who's actually been inside this building.
The big wheels.
Yeah. we always knew there was a possibility some of the wheels would get around to where the actors were. We seemingly went about our work, weren't too, I don't want to use the word embarrassed, but weren't too concerned about what was going on. And I told my dad when I came home, well, I saw two men that I think will be something to remember, a man by the name of Patton and a man by the name of Eisenhower. And it got so that when they were coming, word reports got around, and we said, I guess we sharpened up a little bit, words to that thing. But things are quite differently. All I can remember was more or less dirt, semi-driveways had been changed, no doubt, or something. And as we came out, we would go down, turn right, and go up this way about 2 hours to where we were billeted, or 2 miles, I'm sorry, where we were billeted in a huge building. And we got our chow up there. But I waited too long to come back to remember that.
So this was your 9 to 5 office?
We didn't have the account.
Bill, one of the veterans who was stationed in here told me that all the floors were wooden and that you would hear this clacking noise and you knew that it was Willie, Patton's dog. And if you heard that noise, you knew trouble was coming your way. And the guys would, definitely sharpen up when they would hear that clacking.
Tighten that knot on your tie.
Exactly.
That's right.
I want to say a few things about my favorite soldier, Willie, Patton's dog. We had talked about him in the apple orchard in Nauvoo. Willie saw the war through with Patton in 3rd Army. In the movie, there's that great scene where he says he's named after William the Conqueror. And then when he's shamed by the little poodle, he said, your name is Willie. I have never seen any evidence of that. I don't know if that was Hollywood or reality, but in my opinion, Willie was not a coward. The only thing I found was that during an artillery barrage, Willie ducked under a chair. I don't think that's cowardice. I think that's pretty intelligent. Patton loved him. He said his only problem is that he farted too much. And at one point, Willie woke Patton up at his headquarters in Nancy because the Germans were shelling the area. And they actually destroyed a house down the street, and Willie woke Patton up and it shattered the windows in his room. I recently found out that Patton would write letters for Willie. Patton's grandchildren at home in Washington and Boston, they had left the family dog, and so Willie would dictate letters to Patton that he would write to the family dog in Boston, and that Beatrice, his daughter, would read them to the grandchildren. And they got a big kick out of this. So I thought it was a neat sort of dual person there. One minute you got Patton the warrior, and the next minute you got the grandfather writing the letter from one dog to the next. And, Willie would write things about what he's going to do to the Germans when he gets them. And for children's reading, it was a little bit graphic. But I thought that was very important. And then after Patton died, they brought Willie home to Boston. And they had a bust of Adolf Hitler that he had sent home at some point during the war, and they trained Willie to pee on him. So that is the story of Willie. Getting back to old George here, so the December 19th meeting at Verdun, Patton drives here after the meeting. Omar Bradley's headquarters is further down the street. It's right at the edge of the chasm, is the Hotel Cravat, where Bradley stayed, but there's a large, you'll see there's a large spire of a church. There's a building next to it, and that's where Bradley's headquarters was. Some people claim Patton spent more time at that headquarters than at this one. I'm sure that's simply a matter of perspective. But you agree with that, right, Bill?
I can't remember.
Okay. But to the best of your recollection, Patton was somewhere in this building, correct?
Somewhere, yes.
Okay, great. All right, any questions from anybody?
Somebody's finding time to write letters to Willie back to his grandchildren and all that. What kind of hours did he keep? You read about some leaders in a situation like this, they hardly sleep, and it's almost a superhuman in terms of their energy. What was it?
It is. I would say that, you know, I mentioned to some of you what's called the stress of life. This was a study done in the 1970s. I read an account by a surgeon with the 12th Armored Division, and he said about a week after the war ended, the amount of sick coming into the hospital was just overwhelming. And later in the 1970s, someone had done a study, and they found that when you're under stress, your body reacts, it secretes more adrenaline, your inner defenses go up, and then whenever that element that's stressing you out goes away, your defenses go down and you're much more susceptible to get sick. I did read in Patton's diaries at some point, I couldn't tell you the date, I think it's sometime in June, he said I was so exhausted, I've never felt so exhausted in my life, could not get out of bed. I've done sort of informal polls with soldiers that, you know, were after May, and some said they were the healthiest in their life, other guys said, man, I got pneumonia like a week after the armistice was signed. They said it was the sickest I was ever in my life. So you got to remember, in the 1940s, they didn't have television, and you know, it was a rarity that you get a chance to listen to the BBC, which is your main source of real information, you know, natural information, I should say. So, you know, Patton would do all of his planning and his work, and he got up very early in the morning to go inspect the lines. In fact, a lot of the staffers said you really had to be on your toes at the morning briefing, and this would have been about 7 or 8 a.m. because Patton had already been out and about. And also in the history of combat, things tend to cool down once the sun goes down, especially in this area. The daylight was very short. The sun was going down at almost like 5:30. So once that happens, you can sort of get your evening reports, you do your review, and then you pretty much eat your dinner and you got your free time. Because Patton would write extensive letters not only to his wife, to his children, to various people, and he kept a diary. And the entries were, you know, very long, you know, 4 or 5 paragraphs. They didn't sit down and really clearly think. So he's probably sitting down at a desk for about 3 hours every night, just handling correspondence and writing in his diary.